Good morning, everyone. I will begin this morning with the chant. So if you know this chant, just chant along with me. Om asato ma satgamaya tamaso ma jyotir gamaya mrityor ma amritam gamaya avir avir maedhi rudrayate dakshinam mukham tenamam pahi nityam tenamam pahi nityam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. O Lord, guide us through and through, and ever protect us with thy loving presence. Om, peace, peace, peace to all beings everywhere. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming this morning. My name is Swami Harinamananda. I'm the resident monk in our San Diego monastery. And I haven't been to Hollywood I think for a few years. I haven't lectured here. So it's nice to be here and see some familiar faces. So today I'm going to share an experience with you. An experience about my trip to Harvard. And you may ask, what is a monk doing at Harvard University? Well, one morning, the general secretary of our order called me. He's like the CEO of our order, our Ramakrishna order. And he told me that we'd like you to apply for this scholarship at Harvard University to experience classes at Harvard. And the idea is that it's for monks to come in, take classes that they normally wouldn't take outside of our field, and to get a wider perspective on life and spirituality. So I applied, but there are other people applying. So I got in, and what I want to do today is share that experience with you by taking you with me on this experience so that you can get a feeling for what it was like. By the way, this experience was created by a professor, Dr. Francis Clooney, who created this experience for Hindu monks to come to Harvard. And it was funded by Mr. and Mrs. Nagral, who gave the money to allow there are two of us from the Hindu tradition. You can see me in the middle, and then on my right-hand side is Brahmachari Vandan. He's from the Swami Harinamananda order. So we were the two Hindu monks that came into this program. There are also other monks from the Buddhist tradition. So there's about 3 or 4, I think a total of 10 monastics at the Harvard Divinity School who are all going on this journey. And when you come into Harvard, you're going to go to the city called Cambridge. And Cambridge is in Massachusetts. And one of the first things when you enter into Cambridge, Massachusetts, is you'll notice these wild turkeys. They're all over the city. They're considered the original inhabitants of Cambridge. And as you walk through, wherever they go, traffic stops. Sort of like when you go to India, and if you ever notice the cows, they're considered sacred. Wherever they go, everything stops. That's the same thing with our wild turkeys here. So they're honored and respected as such. Now, as you're walking around Cambridge, you're going to see that Cambridge is considered to be the intellectual hub of the United States. They have some of the greatest poets and writers that have ever come. And as you walk around, you're going to see different houses. You'll see the houses of Robert Frost, E.E. Cummings. There's even the house of Julia Child. Do you know who Julia Child was? She was a famous TV personality who introduced French cuisine into American culture. So you get a feeling, and they even have a place called Professors Road, where some of the great scholars, professors, have lived in this certain district. It's also the place where Swami Vivekananda came and lectured at Harvard University. He was invited by Professor John Henry Wright. Does that name sound familiar to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. He was the one, remember when Swamiji was going to the Parliament of Religions and he needed some credentials? So he asked Professor Henry Wright to give him some credentials. Do you remember Professor Henry Wright's response? He said, to ask you for credentials, Swamiji, is like asking the sun to its right to shine. So Professor Wright invited Swamiji, and you'll see he spoke in that Savor Hall. That's the actual hall right there, and it remains as it was when Swamiji was there. He spoke about religious life in India in 1894. He then stayed in Professor Wright's place, and he even Professor Wright took him to a Roman play at Memorial Hall. That's the inside of the hall, as it would have looked like when Swamiji was there. That's how it looks now. And it was a play in Latin on Roman indulgence. Swamiji would have to adapt to wherever he went and make the best of any situation. As you start to go to the inner campus of Harvard, you're going to start to see this figure. It is the most photographed figure at Harvard University. And when you look at it, if you can see what's inscribed in the cement here, you see three things are inscribed. What are they, you may ask? The first, it says, John Harvard, founder, and 1638. Okay? Do you know what these are known as? These are known as the three great lies. Why are they lies? Well, first of all, this image here is not John Harvard. Okay? Nobody knew what John Harvard looked like. It was most probably the image of the sculpture's son that was created. Second, John Harvard is not the founder of Harvard University. It was founded by Massachusetts General Courts. Now, John Harvard has given half his estate to the university and his entire library collection. And at that time, library books were just very expensive. So to honor this donation, they named the university after John Harvard. Okay. The third lie is that it wasn't founded in 1638. It's founded in 1636. So these are the three great lies. And do you notice something on this side of the sculpture? That is an insignia. It is actually the Harvard insignia, the Harvard symbol. And when you look close at it, what are you going to notice? You'll notice that there are actually three images on that symbol. These are three books. And look at the books here. The top two books here are facing towards you. They're open with the pages facing towards you. Okay? The book in the bottom here is actually facing away from you. It's just a cover, and the pages are blank. This book represents the Old Testament. This book represents the New Testament. And this book, the reason why its pages are blank, yet to be written till this coming of Christ. And when you look at all of this, what do you see? What you see is that, I forgot to tell you also. Inscribed on these books is the word veritas. What does veritas mean, anybody? Truth. Great, yes, truth. It's Latin for truth. So now, when you take a look at this overall image here, what you'll notice is that truth is embedded in this structure. It's covered in these three lies. And the image itself is facing towards some buildings. It's looking at the science building. It's looking at the humanities building and the arts building. Okay? Why is this important? From a Vedantic perspective, what does this mean? I'm going to give you the Vedantic translation of this. Okay? Not what Harvard would say, what we in Vedanta would say. From a Vedantic perspective, we would say it is this veritas is what we call Brahman, the transcendental truth. It is covered in these three lies, which is known as Maya, or the three gunas. And what's being revealed is what he is looking at. He's looking at the sciences, the humanities, the arts. This truth, Brahman, covered in ignorance, it reveals itself in this empirical world as truth, goodness, and beauty. So, what is really interesting here is Brahman, what we call Satchitananda, covered in these three lies, as we said, is revealing itself as the truth in sciences, as the goodness in humanities, the consciousness that connects all of us together is the humanities section, and as the beauty, the bliss in art. So what happens is if you can go back to the truth, follow the truth in the sciences, follow the truth, if you can go back in the social sciences, the humanities, and follow the goodness, and if you can go to the arts and follow it, the beauty, the aesthetics, this will take you back to the original truth veritas, which is the truth that is revealing itself everywhere. Do you get this? It's quite, and you know why Harvard was created? Harvard was created originally to train ministers to preach this truth to that newfound nation at the time. So it has a lot of meaning from us from a Vedantic standpoint. Now, what I'd like to do is take you to the HDS, the Harvard Divinity School itself, which is located on the other side of campus. As we walk there, we're going to pass by this science building. Now, this building actually was created, it actually looks like an object. Can anybody describe what object this appears as? I'll give you a hint. It's a camera. Any camera does that look like?
Polaroid?
Yes, the Polaroid camera. This was created by, why this is so? It's because Edward Land, who invented the Polaroid camera, had given a lot of money to have this building created. So the architects decided, in honor of that, we're going to make it in the style of one of his cameras. How many have had a Polaroid camera? Show of hands. Okay. Do you remember when you put that flash bulb on the top of it? How the flash? That's what this is supposed to be. That little cube that goes on the top, that flash. Polaroid is supposed to give you an instant picture of what's happening right now. As we walk towards the far end of the campus, we're going to get to the Harvard Divinity School. Now, it's a beautiful school, and when I came there, that was a time where, remember, COVID had struck. And so no one had gone to campus for a year and a half. So the school itself is about a 3-year program. So many of the students, this is the first time they're actually coming onto campus. It has 346 students. And the type of people that come there are to be trained in ministry or higher academic education, like a PhD, or to be trained as a social activist or in the nonprofit sector. 357 students coming from 46 different religious backgrounds. What does that mean? It means Trouble? Could be. It lends itself to a lot of different perspectives. In fact, I want to tell you that when we first got there, and you go through this orientation, there are students, we introduce ourselves. And one of the students was from Ukraine. She was a Jewish student. And she was talking about the atrocities that the Russian soldiers were creating for her in Ukraine and how they were devastating her city. And she talked about just the difficulties her family and she had gone through. So you're getting this agitation and this anger, building up this anger and animosity towards the Russian soldiers. We had another woman in our group who was from Siberia. Now, Siberia is in Russia. She talked about how Putin had recruited half the people from her village, half the men, were forced to fight for the Russian soldiers. And the result was they were being slaughtered. So what happened? She said that as a result, spirituality, culture, customs, traditions was being lost from one generation to another generation. And you started having sympathy for these Russian soldiers. You start to get it just lends itself to a multitude of viewpoints. Let me give you another example of just what type of student was coming to HDS, Harvard Divinity School. I had a good friend in a couple of my classes. His name was Jeff, and he said I could use his story. He was working at Amazon, a software engineer. And he told me he kept having these recurring dreams that when he turned about 80 years old, he was waking up and thinking that, is this it? What has my life amounted to? He had a void in his heart. Something awakened within him. It was the voice of, he said, his guru, Neem Karoli Baba. Anybody heard about Neem Karoli Baba? He's an Indian saint. So he's passed away though. But this voice awakened within him. He called it GPS. You know what a GPS is? God pointing system. When your inner heart awakens and a voice awakens within you and starts guiding you. So this voice started guiding him, told him to go to Neem Karoli Baba's ashram in, I believe, New Mexico. So he went there for 2 years and served there. That same voice then told him to come to Harvard Divinity School and become a Hindu chaplain. So out of these 357 students, each one has their own journey and story. Now, one of the great things about going to Harvard is that you get into all sorts of experiences. They're going to be experiences that you feel comfortable with and experiences that you may not feel comfortable with. So when you get into the point where you start introducing yourselves in these small groups, the first thing we had to say is what pronouns we wanted to use. Now, if you have been a monk like me in this Ramakrishna order, you're sheltered from all of this. And when they ask you what pronouns you want to use, you find it kind of like, well, what does that mean? And you find it unusual. So I would be known as a he, him, his pronoun. There is she, her, hers, and also they, them, and theirs. So I was having trouble with this because I would see someone who looked like a he and refer to them as he, and they would want to be referred to as they. And I kept running into this problem a few times until finally someone pulled me aside and said, hey, Swami, I want to tell you something. These pronouns we use are ways that we want to be acknowledged for. They're like our names, our identity, and we want to be honored for. Although we may look biologically one way, internally, I feel a different gender. And I want to be, that's just how the software of the soul works. So I want to be respected as such. I want to be seen, heard. And it then clicked on me. Yes, this is the divine. The divine is coming and expressing itself in each unique embodiment. So we should acknowledge and salute that divinity and celebrate its unique expression in the various individual forms that it's expressing itself within. And that's actually the meaning of namaste. The divine in me salutes the divine in you and celebrates the diversity, that expression, and how it's manifesting through. Now you may say, well, I'm a Vedantist. As a Vedantist, I transcend labels. Why should labels matter? And I'll answer yes and no. Spiritual life is a journey. And in this journey, we begin with going from our confused sense of self. When I was growing up, am I Indian? Am I American? What's my purpose in life? My dharma? What's my role? As I go through this journey, I start to get to a feeling of a more authentic self. Someone that I feel comfortable with. And when you become aligned with your inner predispositions, your own inner samskaras, that's when your talents begin to manifest. That's when you start to embrace the labels that you find yourself categorized in. They empower you. Yes, I'm a Swami, I'm a doctor, I'm whatever. And you embrace it, you own that. And then you flourish in that. And the soul begins to ripen. Then there may come a time when you say to yourself, you know what? I'm not really Indian. I don't even feel American. I'm a universal citizen. Or I don't feel like I feel like I'm the light of the Atman. I see that same divinity within me, within everyone else. At that point, you transcend labels. Labels, they hinder you at that point. So, to me, it seems like there's a three-step process. Going from your confused self to discovering what your authentic self is, to eventually maybe getting to that point where you're a transcendent self. There's a god in the Indian system, in the Indian mythology, known as Ardha Nari Ishvara. Have you heard of that? Let me see, do I have a picture of that one? It's a god, which is, Ardha means half. Nari means woman. Ishvara means man. One who has balanced the feminine energy and the masculine energy. Is spirituality about balancing our energies so that we can eventually maybe transcend them? Now, after these introductions, you're going to go into this larger room with all the students that are coming to the Harvard Divinity School. And the dean of Harvard University is going to speak to you. Actually, the dean of the Divinity School. His name is Dan Hampton. He's a wonderful soul. And he's going to tell you that your journey that you're going to take now, he's going to give you a roadmap for the future. He's going to tell you, he's going to use an analogy of a car. What he's going to say is that when you look in your rear view mirror here, what do you see? What do you see coming into Harvard? What do you see in your past that you're carrying with you? What are you carrying coming from? Where are you emotionally, psychologically, intellectually? What are you bringing with you as you enter into the campus? He said that as a society, we've just come through 5 crises. The global pandemic, racial injustice, the polarization of American politics, global warming, and the unease of America's role in the global community. Then he said, when you look at your side view mirror, what does that indicate for you? What do you see there? You see your blind spots. Your blind spots are produced by your background, your privileges, and your assumptions. And what do they show you? They show you things that you see and also things that you don't see. What are you not seeing right now that's right in front of you because of your past that's sort of being blurred out? There's a Swami, his name is Harinamananda, he's in France right now. He used to tell me that our reality is based on what we value. Our reality is created by what we value. If we value, let's say, for example, in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, it says lust and greed, or let's call it beauty and wealth. If we value beauty and wealth, then that's what's we're going to be focusing on. We're going to see a person and focus on the Armani suit, the Rolex watches, or how beautiful they appear. And everything else will recede into the background. It's basically like looking through the show of a Kardashian show. That's what's going to stand out for you. So, what are you seeing, and what, more importantly, are you not seeing? Those are your blind spots. And then ultimately, when you look through the main window, what are you seeing? What are you excited about in the future? What is it that you see ahead in the journey that lies ahead? And he said, basically, if you want to have a life of satisfaction, you have to create the number one thing, an attitude of gratitude. How do you do this? He said, performing random acts of kindness, by volunteering for some places, celebrating the small things in life, your everyday routine, find meaning and purpose in it. Go through life with a sense of adventure and curiosity. He said, by doing this, you're going to start connecting yourself to everything else. Life will not just seem to be passing by. Instead, you'll start to get connected to your friends and family, to your environment, and also maybe to an ultimate reality. And if you do this, at the end of your life, you'll feel a sense of satisfaction and happiness. So this got me thinking, what am I bringing into Harvard University? When I look at my rearview mirror, what am I bringing in with me? Was it that I'm a Vedantic monk, and I'm coming from this Vedantic, Vedic monk, and I feel that, well, I've got this philosophy that I really love, and I think it's maybe superior to all philosophies? Am I coming in with an attitude of superiority? Or am I saying, wow, this is Harvard University. Last year they had the lowest acceptance rate out of any university. Everybody's really intelligent. I don't have the academic qualifications to be here. I've got this inferiority complex. So what am I bringing into this university? And then, what are my blind spots? And how will I know if I discover them? And then after all of this is over, as I look ahead, how am I going to take all the teachings and the classes? How am I going to integrate them into a cohesive whole so it can help me in the next part of my journey? So all this was started going into my head. Now you start to get into the classes themselves. And I'm going to group my classes that I took into three broad categories. There are scriptural classes, which were more taught in the academic way, and they're considered very head-heavy. There are practical classes, like I took chaplaincy and spiritual counseling, and they are things that you learn tools they can use to help others with. And then there was what I call applied classes, where you learned classes that connected spirituality to music, to the arts, and to literature. So now I'm going to go into just what these different classes were like if you'd be coming to this university. So the first thing I want to mention here is that I took a class, this is Father Francis Clooney. He's the one that created this program for the Hindu monks. He is a Roman Catholic monk, a Jesuit priest, who's teaching Hindu scriptures. And not only does he teach the Hindu scriptures, he's considered an authority on Hindu scriptures. He's what we call a closed reading specialist. He can take a scripture, and because of his knowledge of sociology, history, and anthropology, he can dive deep into that scripture, really breaking it apart and getting into the essence of it. So he taught a class that I was in called the Brihadaranyaka Upanishads. And when you take a class like this, you start to discover how classes like these scriptures are taught, which are taught differently than if you come to a place like this. Basically, it's classes that are taught in an academic style versus classes that we learn as a practitioner. And that's what I want to go into next here. What are the differences when it comes to learning from in an academic way versus when you come to a church or a temple and learn from a practitioner's way? In academia, one of the things you learn to first do is develop a critical analysis, a critical mind. You learn to question the authority, the legitimacy, the source, and you start to break open that scripture. You analyze it, breaking it down into its parts, and start to how it can be integrated into other traditions. You don't assume anything in academia. Now, in these classes, you're really forced to ask a lot of questions. I had gone to the seminary in our headquarters in Bellarmont. And in our seminary, I used to be the one that would ask a lot of questions. And I remember I'd get scolded quite a few times. They'd say, just think about it, meditate upon it, reflect on it before you ask these questions. In academia, questioning is used to get to the truth. So they're encouraged. Also, here you can look at your own tradition through a critical lens, asking yourself sometimes very tough questions about our tradition, seeing in the light of maybe gender, caste, and history. You learn different intellectual perspectives on how to interpret texts through language, social theory, anthropology, and race. But the main thing here in academia is you have to remain objective, unbiased. So the result is learning is conceptual. You never enter into it. You get insights and mental clarity. Now you compare that to what we call a practitioner's approach, where you begin by working within a tradition. You already begin by coming into a practitioner's approach like, I believe in this tradition. And when you do that, faith is an indispensable part of how you approach the scripture. There's a term called Shraddha. Have you guys heard of that? Okay, I'll define Shraddha as this dynamic, intuitive conviction in the truth of the scripture that although you may not understand it, as you keep practicing it and as you keep doing it, things become revealed. Compare that to an academic approach, where you'll have to say that in order to get to the conclusion of something, you have to have a rational approach. A has to lead to B, B has to lead to C, C has to lead to D. As a practitioner's approach, you may have an intuitive experience. You may not be able to explain how you got the answer, but it just happened. So from a practitioner's approach, consistency is the most important thing in order to just keep at it, and it just becomes revealed. From the practitioner's approach, you embody the teachings. You want to make it a lifestyle. So as you go on practicing, you start to feel more centered, connected, and expanded. Ultimately, from a practitioner's approach, We include spiritual experiences, which are not commonly associated in academia. Rituals. We include disciplining yourself, making lifestyle changes so that your life reflects the teachings you're taught. You start to see things in a new way and become transformed. As I was doing this, I came across a couple blind spots. You remember the side view mirror? Okay. So one of the blind spots, I'm going to tell you some of the blind spots that occurred, that was revealed to me. The first was about gender bias. Is there a gender bias in the teachings of religion? So I took a class called Advanced Introductory Buddhism, taught by Dr. Goldstein, who's an authority in this subject. And we were reading the most authentic biography on Buddha, called the Buddha Charita by Ashvaghosha. Now, in that biography, we got to a section where Buddha was telling young men to be aware of women, that women were obstacles in your spiritual path, so you should shun women. As he was reading this part of the biography, there was a young woman in our class. She was a Buddhist. And she raised her hand. She said, "This language is making me feel uncomfortable." She goes, "I don't feel myself being identified with the biography, with what was being said here." So me, in my Vedantic training, my monastic training, I pulled her aside after class and told her, as I've been taught, that, well, Buddha is talking to young men. If he was talking to women, he would have said the same thing to women. He would have said men were the problem. And she responded, "That may be so, Swami, but still, this language is triggering me. I feel upset. I don't find myself being able to relate to what Buddha is saying. Is nirvana even possible for a woman like me? I don't find any identity, any relationship in this. I feel like a second-class citizen." And she was right. And I remember calling that night, I called the convent, the Hollywood convent, and I spoke to a nun. And I said, "Is this true? Do you feel like second class?" In the Gospel of Ramakrishna, we read about women in gold as the main obstacle. And the nun told me, "Yes, of course." And it was just something like, a light turned on within me. I remember I gave this talk in Santa Barbara, and one Santa Barbara nun told me, "Oh my God, is this the first time you realize this?" I said, "It's different from a male perspective because you can understand it intellectually. But if it triggers you internally, that's a whole new arena." And yes, they're right. And then I took this question to a Hindu professor in Hindu studies, who was a female professor there. And she told me, "Yes, where are the voices of women? Where are the voices of women in spirituality?" She told me the reason it's important. She gave me an example. She gave an example from Mirabai and a song by Mirabai. She said there's a song by Mirabai where Mirabai is walking in the village and it starts to rain, and she puts this scarf over her head to protect her hair. As it rains, the red scarf starts to bleed. The dye starts to come out of the scarf, starts to bleed into her body, and the dye goes all over her body. The body's covered in red. And she's singing to her Lord Krishna, telling Krishna, "Krishna, Krishna, every cell is percolating with love for you, the color of red. It's this love for you that I feel, and I want to express this love for you." The professor told me this is an example that village women in India can relate to. Putting on a scarf, having it dye. And that it's a vivid, visceral example. And it lends itself to that. If Mirabai feels this way, I can also feel this way. I can also achieve nirvana. So she was saying, it's very important to start hearing the voices of women. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the convent in Santa Barbara. And we heard about the many lives of the women saints, of the American nuns, and how they connected to different devotees and had transformed different devotees. I had gained so many insights for myself and was learning what I should do as a monk. So it was just nice to hear. And I think as we go along, more voices will be expressed. Now you may ask, then I asked the question, well, what do we do now with these scriptures that we're reading right now? If the language is creating this tension, what do we do about that? And that's an issue that cannot be answered at this time. We'll have to do it sometime later. But it's good to think about. The other thing really quickly here is that another thing that came up was in my spiritual counseling class, we were talking about peace. And from a Vedantic perspective, as a spiritual practitioner, we're always taught that if you feel peaceful internally, then the external world will reflect that. Now, more than half the class, was saying, no, the way we obtain peace is if you're experiencing racial injustice, gender bias, discrimination, this has to be done at an institutional level. It's a systemic issue. We've got to work in it. We've got to work in it from that framework. From a Vedantic monk, I'm always like, no, it's the individual. If enough individuals change, then society changes. It's sort of a bottom-up approach. But they kept referring to, no, it's got to be a top-down approach. You change the institutions, that trickles down to the individuals. So this was another blind spot that I was coming into tension with and was being revealed to me that there's more than one way of doing things. The second type of classes was we called the applied classes. And this is a class I took with spiritual counseling taught by Dr. Cheryl Giles. And that's her on the right-hand side. These classes were really interesting because they were experiential and interactive. And what I mean by that is that we brought up our own issues into class. And what I loved about this is that the professors would share from their own experiences. They were both, they had their private practices and they also worked in hospitals. So they would talk about the difficulties they had in dealing with patients and clients and the struggles they had gone through. And they talked about things that worked and also things that didn't work. Okay. The other thing that I loved about what they talked about was they also were very open about how they had all taken counseling. They had all been counseled themselves through psychologists. And that it was important for them to get this counseling because they start to become aware of their own triggers, their own biases, their own prejudices, so that when they become aware of this, they don't project that onto their client. And all of this then brought up a greater issue. Is spiritual practices enough to awaken, to see within ourselves our own blind spots? Is that enough? Or also, do we need counseling as well? This brought up a whole larger issue. Are there people who practice spirituality, let's say, but yet still remain, they still have these pockets that there's anger, depression is still there, and they go through life remaining like that? Or do we need to go through some type of counseling to see the internal problems that exist within us? Are both necessary? This brought up this whole larger issue that was discussed about. And another thing about this class is that we would get in these triads. So you practice your counseling techniques. You'd have a counselor, a counselee, someone who's counseled, and then an observer. And we'd switch roles. And one of the most difficult things in counseling, what I discovered, what we tend to do, is we tend to jump to a conclusion and then try to fix the problem. It's called the fix-it mentality. And in counseling, the thing is, you want to try to create a more loving, compassionate presence so that the person who's being counseled can let go, release their difficulties, the struggles they're going through, and in that release, they'll also probably give you the answers that also are necessary. It's just you guiding and pointing out those answers to them. I told I'm going to try to maintain my time here, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. Another type of class we had was in the Buddhist chaplaincy class. I took a class on compassion, death, and dying. And here we start off classes where for 15 minutes we get into a circle and meditate on death. And the idea was that we first had to come to terms with our own death before we can help others with their death. In this class, we did things like writing our own obituaries and creating a Dharma box. And it was surprising. When people wrote their obituaries, one of the surprising things was that people did not write, nobody wrote about where they went to school, the accolades they achieved, what they did. You know what they wrote about? They wrote about the love that they received and the love that they gave. That was what was most valuable at the time of death. And in these Dharma boxes, it's a Buddhist term for here, when you're going to transition from this body to the next, what do you want read to you? What kind of environment do you want to transition out of? So people would put, like, for me, I'd have pictures of my Ishtadevata, maybe my guru, could be your parents. What do you want chanted? In the Hindu system, usually the Bhagavad Gita, we want chanted. Ganges water, we want in our mouth. Could be incense. Someone said, cats, what was interesting to me was that we had about 20 people in our group. Over half of them talked about their pets and pictures of their pets. And it was also dawning to me that how animals also transmit love. And for them, a lot of unconditional love was given by their animals. So they wanted their pictures of the pets, they wanted to feel that loving presence as they were transitioning out. One woman, she was an elderly woman, had written these cards that she brought into class. And she wanted the cards read out to her children, what she wanted her children to know before her transition. So it was very interesting. The idea is how, in this kind of thing, how to go to a higher state of consciousness. How can we leave our body in the highest state of consciousness? That's the idea. In Buddhism, they have these guided meditations called poa, where they before you pass, like 2-3 months before, every day they work on sort of like a chakra meditation. In puja, it's the same thing we call Buddha Shuddhi, going up the chakras and out to your Sahasrara. So they practice this on a daily basis, and they connect it maybe to some music. And they create this so at the time of transition, you want to, again, do this and transition out in the highest possible way. The final class I want to talk about was a class called Religious Dimensions of Human Experience. To me, this was like my funnest class. It was taught by Prof. David Carrasco, this person here. You know who this person reminded me of? Denzel Washington. He was just really cool, suave. He started off the class talking about hierophanies. Hierophanies are a spiritual encounter with the divine. He talked about Black Elk, who's a Native American, and goes into this ghost dance and has this cosmic vision, this cosmic experience. He also talked about Rabindranath Tagore having a nature mystic experience. In fact, let me just read this to you really quick. Tagore was out in nature and had this beautiful, mystical, cosmic experience. And described this as this. One day, while I stood watching at early dawn, the sun sending out its rays from behind the trees, I suddenly felt as if some ancient mist had in a moment lifted from my sight, and the morning light on the face of the world revealed an inner radiance of joy. The invisible screen of the commonplace was removed from all things and all men, and their ultimate significance was intensified in my mind. And this is the definition of beauty. Remember, beauty is a doorway back to the infinite truth. That which was memorial in this experience was its human message, the sudden expansion of my consciousness in the superpersonal world of man. The poem I wrote on the first day of my surprise was named The Awakening of the Waterfall. The waterfall, whose spirit lay dormant in its ice-bound isolation, was touched by the sun, and bursting in a cataract of freedom, it found its finality in a vision passed away. In an unending sacrifice, in a continual union with the sea. After 4 days, the vision passed away, and the lid hung down upon my inner sight. In the dark, the world once again put on its disguise of the obscurity of an ordinary fact. So he talked about St. Teresa of Avila and the 7 mansions. And as you get the feeling of this, you correlated it to the 7 chakras that we have in the tantric system. So we also went into Toni Morrison, who's the first African American to win a Nobel Prize in literature. And we talked about her rites of passage and the spirituality that was reflected in her writings. We went into the apocalypse, talked about the Holocaust. And there was a Holocaust survivor that came into class through Zoom, Judith Sherman. And she talked about on the day when she passes away and goes to heaven, she is going to hold a mirror to God and ask God, how can you live yourself? How can you look at yourself knowing the atrocities that were going on to my people? And in that question, it brought up this whole topic. Is God not only the source of good, but is God also the source of what we call negative experience as well? We had Tony Amaker, Harvard basketball coach, who talked about one of his players where he said, blessings can be disguised as pain, setback, and failures. He had a star player called Jeremy Lin. I don't know if you know him. He's an Asian American. He was a great player at Harvard. Came out, couldn't get an NBA team to touch him. He lived in his brother's living room for a long period of time, but he continued to practice and practice and practice until finally he got his shot. An NBA team called on him, and then he was a sensation for a certain period of time, an NBA sensation. Tony Amaker would say, destiny is where opportunity meets self-effort. Destiny is where opportunity meets self-effort. And finally, we even went to Arthur Kleinman, who was a physician, came into class, had written a book called The Soul of Care, where he described how his wife was experiencing Alzheimer's. And for 20 years, the person who served him, now he had to serve her. And he talked about what we call real karma yoga. In the process of serving her, he lost his own ego, his own individuality. His wife's desires became his desires. His wife's joys became his joys. And before his wife would ask anything, he would intuit what to do and just do it. And when he was connected, he talked about how a lot of people burn out to service by helping another. He became enlivened. So this is some of the experience that I had here at Harvard. And now, outside of the classes, very quick, we had a thing called Thursday Multi-Religious Faith Day, where different traditions would come on Thursday, and they do a ritual and explain that ritual to us. So for example, on the right-hand side, we had the Hindu tradition explain Diwali to all the students at HDS. Harvard was also a place where I had a chance to do things I normally wouldn't do on campus. One of those things was to go outside in Cambridge, and I went to a concert. And this concert was by a group called Silk Road. And in this group, you'll see it's an international group of different instruments and different musicians getting together. You'll see violins, sitars, tablas, congos, just a variety of different musicians from all over the world. There was an African-American woman who started off, and she sang a jazz song. And just to remind me that, jazz. She broke off into jazz and talked about how jazz is spontaneity and creativity. And when you're aligned with that creativity, it's like the divine is manifesting through you. You don't know what's going to happen. You're spontaneous. In the moment, you start to play. And you don't know what the next moment holds. You live in the present. This is being connected with your divine source. And as she went from jazz, she then broke off into a Bengali song. She sang Rabindranath Tagore's national anthem. I was like, so impressive. She then sang another song in Japanese. It was just wonderful to see this. So when it was over, we were all clapping, and I remember that we were still seating. They wanted us to sit down. I felt this bump behind me. Someone had like bumped me in the back seat, and I'm like looking around, like, "Hey, sit down. It's not over yet." And it was this person, Yo-Yo Ma.
Oh, wow.
He got up from behind me and went onto the stage. You can see I was right here. I was in the front row, and so I didn't know who he was. I mean, I heard about him, a little bit, and then he started performing, and it was beautiful. And it turns out Yo-Yo Ma is the founder of Silk Road Group. He founded this group. And it was also at this point where I had a chance to go and experience Van Gogh's exhibition. How many have gone to a Van Gogh exhibition? If you haven't gone, it's like entering into a Van Gogh painting. Now, Van Gogh has the ability to see what we normally see, but he reveals it I would say, in a divine way. He makes you see the starry night that we typically would see, but the way he expresses it is in a beautiful array of lights and colors, a very mystical experience. It's just like what he's telling you is that stop, pause. The divine is all around you. You just need to have the lens to see it. Harvard is also a place where, in Cambridge, really cold. Okay, I never experienced that type of weather before. And one of the things that, when it first snowed and you went outside, everything came to a stop. There was a heaviness in that silence. You felt it. The silence, it was palpable. You can feel it. It was also a very sort of mystical, divine experience. Finally, as we ended off our year, our professor and mentor was Dr. Clooney. He took me and Brahmachari Vandan to Walden Pond. Walden Pond is where Thoreau was in this place, practiced 2 years of silence in meditation here. So he got a chance to reflect about what had happened. And the last thing that happened was, a way to cap this off was that my two professors, Chris Berlin and Professor Gerald Childs, they're both Buddhists, my Buddhist chaplaincy professors and spiritual counseling professors, created this retreat at the Bear Center for Buddhist Studies in a beautiful place. It's about 1.5 hours away from Boston. So we went there, and there were about 45 people there. Half the people were chaplains from different universities or hospitals. The other half were students who were becoming chaplains from Yale and Harvard University. What I loved about this retreat was you had classes of 5 days. You could only talk in class. Outside of class, it was silence. It gave us a chance to deeply reflect on everything that happened. And they created this environment which you started to feel very comfortable with everybody you were with. Feeling so comfortable, things started to unlock. People started just sharing their most intimate secrets, and things just started becoming more and more revealed. And I remembered, for me, the second to last day, there was sort of like an incident that happened between me and a Buddhist nun. And it sparked something within where I got into class and we had these round circular discussions, got into class, and I just remembered myself just starting to cry and cry and cry and cry. I couldn't remember the last time I ever cried like that. And why I'm saying this was that as the heart started softening up, the tears were flowing out, and this emptying process, I'd say cleansing process was occurring. I needed some support. There was this cry for support. What I started noticing, the teachings that I'd got there that were in my head started sinking into my heart in a real experiential way, that I started soaking up the teachings in a new light. They had new meaning, and they had real support for me. So that was the way that my Harvard experience ended. And lastly, I'm going to share that this is my, in every god, they have like an animal, it's like their vehicle. This is my vehicle. Not that I'm a god or anything like that, but this was given to me when I first came to Harvard. My apartment wasn't ready. So I just stayed in an Airbnb in a beautiful Jamaican couple. And they gave me this bike just for free, just out of love. So I rode this bike. I used this bike the entire time, through snow, through rain, through everything. And then my last week, I couldn't give it to him. There was nobody that needed it. So ultimately then I told my friend in that physics building, this is actually in front of the physics building, said, I'm going to park it here, and I'd like you to find someone to give it to. And he said, sure. So I parked it here. Then I came back to San Diego. When I got back that morning in San Diego, I had an email. He said someone had cut the lock and stolen the bike. It was revealing to me, thou who had giveth also had taken it. We are not the owners of any of this. We have the right to use it, but we don't have the right to claim it. So, and finally, in just 30 seconds, we talked about the rear view mirror. We talked about the side view mirror. Now, what does looking ahead look like? So for me, in my experience, what has happened is that after I graduated, I was told by professors, you must continue your experience and get an internship as a chaplain. Nowadays, they say, what is a Hindu chaplain? A chaplain or a Vedantic chaplain. Someone who can take the scriptures we know and apply them to today's time. Also, someone who knows rituals and who can make use of these rituals so that in a hospital setting, we may be called to help purify or help someone feel cleansed and purified and help them get to that higher state of consciousness. Are there rituals that we can do or perform that can help do this? So we have to take rituals and how to apply them to today's time. And thirdly, we have to also, as Hindu chaplains, be knowledgeable about counseling. We as monks are not trained in counseling. It's not part of our seminary. We are trained sort of like learning to swim in India. They throw you in the pool and you just learn sink or swim. So here we're being trained in a way that's conducive for the people here. So there's a motto in our ashram, in our Ramakrishna order, Atmana Mokshartam Jagat Hitaya Cha, for one's own salvation and for the good of the world. So how can we, as monks today, adapt ourselves to the needs of today's society? Today's society is changing. The needs are changing. So how can we adapt ourselves to fulfill and help those that are in distress, in pain, in suffering because of COVID? You know what COVID has caused in Harvard University and in our community in San Diego? It's caused a sense of isolation. We have lost community. people don't come here. They go watch it on the YouTube. That lack of community, that lack of connection is creating a sense of alienation for all of us. So, and the alienation results in depression, anxiety, grief. So how can we be instruments to help people verbalize and express that and help cleanse them? That's my, thank you for joining me on this experience of Harvard. And if you have any questions, I think we'll go in the green room and we can talk some more then. Thank you so much. Do you read it or do you want me to read it? Okay. So next week we have a special surprise, a delight. Speaking about women in spirituality, the topic is going to be American Women Inspired by Swami Vivekananda by Pravajika Bhavani Prana, who's a trustee of the Sharda Math, and also another speaker, Vedanta's Impact on the West by Pravajika Divyananda Prana. She's that dynamic nun who's very popular, and she's also the editor of Samvit in Sharda Math. So that will be next Sunday. That's worth coming to. We also, for those of you who are interested in coming to San Diego, they both will be speaking in San Diego on Saturday. So that's 1 week from yesterday. And we're going to have a mini retreat actually, starting at 10 o'clock, going till about 1:30. And the idea is that both nuns will speak. It'll be a topic on Jnana Yoga. So there'll be Jnana Yoga Part 1, Jnana Yoga Part 2. Both will hit different aspects of it, applied Jnana Yoga. And then afterwards, I'm going to interview the nuns. We want to know we want to get inspiration from their lives. So I'd love to interview the nuns, ask them what makes them tick. Who are they inspired by? Why are they doing what they're doing? Where have they learned what they've learned? So we'll do a little bit and then open up to Q&A from the audience. So that will be from 10 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And everybody's served lunch also. If you come, you don't have to register, just come. We'll feed you lunch and snacks. That's the idea of Holy Mother. Mother she always feeds her children well. So,
Swamiji, for those who can't come, is it going to be online as well?
So what I'm first encouraging, this is the difficulty we have, right? We put it online, nobody shows up. I don't want the nuns to come and see an empty audience. You feel enlivened when you see people. There's this dynamism, right? And so it helps to see people because they feed off your energy. So let us wait, come if you can, and then we'll see if we show it online. Yes?
We're in Toronto, so I'd like to have it online so we can watch them.
Yeah, okay. We'll keep that in mind. Okay.
Okay, upload it later.
Yeah.
Yeah, upload it later.
That's true. Okay. Do you have a question?
I don't have a question. Just kind of make a comment.
Yeah.
Like, if it's actually like recorded in some way, then whatever insights are like sort of like express like throughout the sessions, like will be available for reference after?
Yeah, we're going to, so normally in San Diego, we don't have a place that we put, our website doesn't do video capacity because all the lectures are done by recorded in Hollywood, Trabuco, and Santa Barbara. So let me see if we can work that out, okay? Maybe we can record it and then we can give it to one of the other centers to upload it on their site.
Wonderful talk. They are also speaking on Wednesday night and Thursday night here.
Oh, okay. So they're also speaking here Wednesday night and Thursday night?
Wednesday night is from Prajika Bhavani Prana,
Uh-huh.
and Thursday night is Prajika
Divyananda Prana. Yes,
10:30.
come. They are really worth coming. I've heard if you watch Divyananda Prana, they're very dynamic, very, very wonderful to see. So come to at least one of the events, if not all. I'll just close. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.